Hello and welcome back to Human Biology. We're going to have a quick lecture on tissues and the integumentary system. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here are tissues. Tissues being groups of cells similar in structure and working together to provide some sort of commonality, a function, if you will. Now, histology is the study of tissues, and in the world of tissues, there are four main types we will discuss here. This is epithelial. Epithelial tissues are all the coverings of the body, inside and outside, all the coverings. Connective tissues that kind of hold things together. Nervous tissues, think about your brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves. These are going to be capable of sending and responding to messages, if you will, to stimulation. And then muscle tissue, which is specialized to convert energy in the form of ATP, that's our cellular energy, ATP. They convert ATP or energy into motion. Okay, they are set up specifically for that task. So without further, let's go here. All right, first things first, let's talk about the epithelial tissues. These are indeed the critical boundaries of the body, folks. These are all of the major coverings inside and outside. Your skin is epithelium. The lining of your mouth is epithelium. The lining of your intestines is epithelium, if that makes any sense at all. So these are all the major linings. Even the linings of your heart, the linings of your blood vessels, all considered epithelium. Now, epithelia all display some similar characteristics, and you need to be familiar with these characteristics. One, they display polarity. That simply means they tend to have a top and a bottom. Okay, so the cells can look quite different at the top than they do at the bottom. That's a classic concept of epithelia. Epithelia often have some specialized contacts. You may remember from prior lecture tight junctions and desmosomes. Tight junctions kind of seal the barriers between cells and make them impermeable. Desmosomes link cells together structurally and make them very strong, like a whole group of cells, a whole tissue layer will be very strong because of desmosomes. This is very classic of epithelia. They are supported by connective tissue, and we're going to mix into that. They are avascular. Now, that's a very important term. Avascular means they do not receive direct blood flow. Epithelia does not have capillaries, arteries, veins in the epithelium. It is avascular. It doesn't receive direct blood flow. What it does is it gets its nutrition from underlying connective tissue. The underlying connective tissues often have lots of vascularity. They are very vascular. They have lots of capillaries, all right, lots of blood flow. And what will happen is nutrients and water and what have you will diffuse up, remember diffusion? Diffuse up into the epithelia to keep it nourished, and then waste products from the epithelia will diffuse down to enter the bloodstream to be cleansed from the body. So epithelia are avascular. They do not get direct blood flow, and they are supported by connective tissues, both chemically and physically. I can grab my skin and not tear a hunk of flesh off because my connective tissue in the lower portions of my skin here is very strong. It's made of connective tissue. It's quite supportive and helps hold together the epithelia that are above it. All right, and I've got a few other things here. They are normally well innervated, which is true. There's a lot of touch receptors that are skin associated, as an example. And epithelia tend to have an incredibly high regenerative capacity. That is to say that epithelia tend to heal fast, which makes perfect sense because at the end of the day, your coverings are boundaries that keep potentially dangerous things out. So if you have damage to one of these boundaries, that's an entry point for a pathogen, like a nasty bacterium or something, to get in and cause you legitimate problems. So we want to prevent that. Our epithelia have an incredibly high regenerative capacity. Let's go here. Here's a nice example of epithelium. Okay, a nice example epithelium. Specifically, this one's called transitional epithelium, and I put it up there because I find it to be kind of neat. This is an epithelium that has round cells under certain circumstances, and then those cells can get quite flat indeed under different circumstances. This is transitional epithelium because it goes through transitions. This is the lining of your bladder. And what does your bladder do all day long? Fill, and then go back to a resting state, and fill, You void urine, it goes back to a resting state and fill and void and fill and void. And what will happen is this epithelium is set up to be able to stretch and then relax and stretch and relax. These round cells will be quite round when the bladder is empty, and they have a capacity to flatten out when the bladder is full, you might say. So this is a nice example epithelium. Unique cells, top and bottom. They are connected to connective tissue underneath. Poor terminology on my part, but you get my point. They are avascular, no direct blood flow. A classic covering in epithelium. Next we have connective tissues. And connective tissues are very diverse. There's a lot of different types of connective tissues, but they all share some similar characteristics. And that's what we're going to focus on. All right, now in the world of connective tissues, there is what's called connective tissue proper. There is cartilage, which is a connective tissue. There is osseous tissue, being bone. Your bones are connective tissue. Blood is a connective tissue as well. You have lots of different types of connective tissue. We consider all of these connective tissue, even though they are quite different, because they all come from the same developmental area when you were in utero, all right? So you used to be just a fertilized cell. And then that cell began to divide, and you came like a ball of cells. And that ball of cells began to have minor differentiation start to occur, and things started to become a head and a back end and arms and legs and what have you. Well, the same basic area in that embryological development, the same basic spot developed into all of these connective tissues. And as a result of this, all connective tissues share some similarities. They share some characteristics. Yeah, let's see, what all do we want to say here? A variety of functions, because epithelia can be quite diverse. All right, connective tissue has, in all times, they have three parts. They will have cells, ground substance, and fibers. Cells, ground substance, and fibers. In ground substance, fibers, these are together referred to an extracellular matrix. Nothing I'm that keen on. I'm just going to say cells, ground substance, and fibers. The idea here is that there are cells. You can look at this connective tissue here and you can see the cells. There is ground substance, which is kind of the clear stuff. Imagine ground substance as being like the gel in which everything is suspended. So, for instance, in blood, the ground substance is watery plasma, okay, flowing through your bloodstream. In bone, the ground substance would be like calcium and phosphate that make your bones strong. There's this non-living portion, okay? And the ground substance and the fibers are parts of this non-living portion. Now, in the reference of fiber, there are three different fiber types that are found in connective tissue. I'm only going to talk about two of these, and those are collagen and elastic fiber, right? Collagen and elastic fiber. And depending upon how much of which one of these you got, you know, some tissues have pretty much all collagen. Some tissues have a lot of elastic fiber. Depending upon the ratios there, it gives connective tissue some different attributes. And let's talk about those. Elastic fiber is exactly the way you would expect elastic fiber to be. It's very stretchy. It's like elastic. It can be stretched and relaxed and stretched and relaxed. And tissues that have a lot of elastic fiber tend to be, you know, pretty resilient. Your ears, okay? Your ears have a lot of elastic fiber in them. It gives them that resilience that we think of. Like your nose is very hard, all right? Very tough, very hard, doesn't really move. But your ears are flexible. Your nose does not have large amounts of elastic fiber, whereas your ears do, okay? And it gives them that flexibility. Collagen fiber, by comparison, is very strong. It's like rope. Okay, super tough stuff. You pull against collagen and it gets tight and it goes no further. Strong as a steel cable, okay? If you kind of bend your arm just a little, like so, and dig into your elbow from the top, you can feel a tendon coming off your bicep. Or I tell you what, alternatively, you can reach down and feel the back of your ankle, just above your ankle itself. And you can feel your Achilles tendon, or what we call your calcaneal tendon, okay? That is a solid chunk of collagen fiber making up that tendon. And they are really strong, really tough, all right? So collagen, incredibly strong, elastic fiber, quite flexible by comparison. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about cartilage. I think this is a meaningful thing to do. So cartilage is important mostly because its ability to take compression. So cartilage is great at being compressed and relaxed and compressed and relaxed and compressed and relaxed. That's why cartilage makes up the discs in your vertebrae. Cartilage makes up the parts of your knees that take that compression, okay? And you probably know someone that has some sort of cartilage damage in a knee or something, and they don't get around as well as some others might, okay? Cartilage is fabulous at working in our joints and allowing us to do the things that we do. Now, cartilage has a few things we should talk about. Number one, it lacks much innervation, and two, it lacks a lot of vascularization. Cartilage gets very little to no blood flow. As a result of this, if you ever were to see cartilage, like if you are cutting up a piece of chicken and you see inside the knee capsule or something like that, there's like a white plasticky substance. That's cartilage. Your cartilage in your knees is this color. It's incredibly light in coloration because it has no direct blood flow. It's basically just a bunch of collagen fiber, and it gives it a very whitish appearance, okay? There's a downside to this. Because it lacks vascularization, it doesn't get much blood flow, cartilage either doesn't heal or it has a tendency to heal very, very slowly, all right? Which is a downside to this. But just making a point here about sort of how this all looks. Now, a wonderful example of cartilage is a type of cartilage that we call hyaline cartilage. You know what? Let's talk about some cells here. Chondroblasts and chondrocytes. Anytime you see the root term blast, a blastic cell is making something, okay? So a chondroblast, chondros, that's a root for cartilage, is making cartilage. So what'll happen is a cell will come in, like here, and it'll make cartilage all around itself. That's a chondroblast, and now it's stuck there. It's stuck in place. And what they will do is they will mature and become chondrocytes. Chondrocytes are happy, mature cartilage cells, hanging out inside of there, doing their cartilage cell thing, and having the ability to go back and make cartilage when necessary as time progresses. Long story, take anatomy one. All right, let's talk about hyaline cartilage. So a wonderful example of cartilage is hyaline cartilage, which is what you see here. Hyaline cartilage is what you have in your nose. Hyaline cartilage is making up most of your tracheal passages in here. So if you feel all this, you can feel all this hard stuff. That's hyaline cartilage. In your ribs, so your ribs where they connect to your sternum down low here, it's mostly hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage also forms up all of the cartilage in your joints for the most part. Okay, so hyaline cartilage is very important, and it's very, very important because hyaline cartilage makes up a structure set that we call your epiphyseal plates. If you've ever heard the term growth plate in terms of how bones get longer as you grow taller, all right, you watch like a 10-year-old grow 2 foot in 3 or 4 years. That is an epiphyseal plate made of hyaline cartilage causing those bones to elongate. Epiphyseal plates or growth plates are the locations in long bones where those long bones will get longer as a person grows taller. So this is literally the mechanism behind a person growing taller. Yeah, hyaline cartilage, incredibly important for us. Let's go here. All right, here are a few more tissues that I just want to talk a little bit about. Here is bone, blood, and nervous tissue. What do I want to say here? Bone, blood, these are both connective tissues. Again, the matrix here in bone is going to be comprised of a lot of calcium and phosphate, whereas down here in blood, it is a liquid, it is plasma, so these are quite different in that kind of concept. I will point out bone and blood have a unique relationship because inside of your bones, depending upon your age and certain locations, your bones will contain what's called bone marrow, okay? And there's a type of bone marrow that makes blood cells. So your blood gets made in your bones. So your bones contain bone marrow that make blood. So they have an intriguing relationship. That's why they are here together. Now, inside of bone, it's got this really rocky, kind of tree ring-like appearance. You will find bone cells, and bone cells are called osteocytes. So if cartilage cells are chondrocytes, bone cells are osteocytes. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. Those are osteocytes. And there are also what are called osteoblasts. Osteoblasts make bone, and the osteocytes would be happy, mature bone cells. But for our purposes, osteocytes, bone cells. Then there's blood. You can tell that this is not homogeneous. Like this kind of all looks similar. But this, you've got these little pink donuts, you've got these big purple things, got some little bits and pieces of stuff here. This looks a little different. These red, pinkish red colored cells, these are called erythrocytes, or red blood cells. All right, erythrocytes, or red blood cells. These are the cells in your body that carry hemoglobin. These are the cells in your body that bear oxygen. You need to know this, all right? Red blood cells, erythrocytes, carry the oxygen that you move around the body from your lungs. There are also these kind of bigger purplish cells. These are leukocytes. Leukocytes are white blood cells, and white blood cells are protective in nature. They are immune cells in the grand scheme of things. And you actually have lots and lots and lots of different types of white blood cells. And then last but not least, down here, we have the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, this is one neuron. So this big cell here is a single neuron. You have billions of neurons. Huge amounts of neurons in your body. This is just showing you a single neuron, a neuron being a generalized nervous tissue cell. So here is the neuron with its little projection sticking off. These are called axons and dendrites. That's the projections off of a neuron. And you might notice that there are little dark spots sort of all around the place too. These little dark spots are called neuroglia. These are neuroglial cells. So there are two main cell types in nervous tissue. These are neurons and neuroglia. The neurons get all the love because they are the nerve cells that send messages. So they'll receive a message through their dendrites and send messages down their axons. Imagine information coming in and then being sent out. This is what a neuron does. And then there are neuroglia. Neuroglia stands for nerve glue. These are the cells that do everything the nerve needs to survive. They will provide nutrition for the nerve, they will clean up after the nerve, they will move the nerve around, they will guide connections between nerves. These are neuroglial cells, and they're very important for us. Yeah, that'll do. Last but not least here, yeah, good, is muscle tissue. So there are three types of muscle tissue. These are skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle, and I've got them down here. Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. I'm going to talk a little bit about these. All right, here we go. Skeletal muscle is specialized. Well, hang on, let me try again. Muscle is specialized to turn ATP into motion. It's just what it does. Now, in the world of muscle, skeletal muscle is that which we are consciously able to control. All right, I can stand up and walk around and do all these things. I'm thinking about doing those things. That means I'm using skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is exclusive to your heart, okay? And then smooth muscle is going to be found primarily in like your digestive tract. Smooth muscle is very slow and relaxed in the way that it works, whereas skeletal muscle can be incredibly strong and works very quickly, right? So yeah, and if you look at it, skeletal muscle is kind of cool, and so is cardiac muscle for that matter. Both of these are what we call striated, all right? They are striated. But the trick is, I mean, if you look, you can see the striations, the striped appearance that's here. But the idea, again, is that skeletal muscle is what we also call voluntary. I think about it and it happens. Whereas cardiac muscle is not voluntary, it is involuntary. Your heart beats no matter what you're thinking about, at least we hope that it does, all right? I decide to flex my skeletal muscle, my heart works without my conscious influence. Skeletal muscle is voluntary. Good. It is voluntary. Let's go here. And that takes us to the integumentary system. So let's have a little tour of the integumentary system. All right, the integumentary system. So your integumentary system consists of your skin and your accessory organs like your hair and your nails, cutaneous glands, that kind of thing. It's actually quite a large organ system, accounting for about 7% of your body weight or a couple of meters of surface area. So this is a lot of tissue. And it ranges in thickness from being very thin, like on your cheeks, okay, the bottoms of your arms down here, to being quite thick, like on your shoulders and the palms of your hands. So there's variable levels of thickness here. Inspecting the skin, your hair, your nails is an important part of a medical exam. I can tell you if you've got a liver condition or some sort of mineral deficiency, a whole host of problems by looking at the skin. And further, your skin gets exposed to all sorts of potentially damaging situations. Think about eating foods that are too hot or stepping on a Lego in your house. Your skin is very vulnerable, and as such, it tends to get more attention than any other organ system. Okay, dermatologists? Hey, you've got a nice gig going because there's always people looking for skin care. Yes, indeed. More medical treatment. Let's go here. Now, what are the functions of your skin? Well, there are a lot of these. First, I will say protection. Your skin is a wonderful barrier against chemical, physical, and biological problems. Chemicals, like, again, eating a salad, putting vinegar on it. That vinegar is an acid and it's quite damaging given the right circumstances. But your skin is a wonderful barrier that keeps that stuff out. Physical damage. I can bump into all sorts of potentially damaging things and not have anything penetrate my skin surface because it's a wonderful physical barrier. It's tough and it can handle a lot. Like I can fall down and not hurt myself really because my skin is very tough and can handle that physical abrasion. And last but not least, it is a wonderful biological barrier. You keep all sorts of potentially damaging things out just by having your skin be intact. Works like a charm. Your skin also produces secretions that are toxic to things like bacteria. Your skin produces melanin. Melanin will block ultraviolet radiation from penetrating the skin's surface. It's a wonderful barrier against the world around us and the damaging radiation that we come into contact with. Keratin, let's see, do we want to talk about all this stuff? Keratin is what makes skin tough. I think that'll be good enough. Let's just keep on rolling. Metabolic functions. Your skin is incredibly important for manufacturing vitamin D. Without vitamin D, it doesn't matter how much milk you drink, you're not absorbing calcium from your intestines. Vitamin D is absolutely paramount to your survival as a human being. For you to be able to absorb calcium from your intestinal tract, you gotta have vitamin D. And in the past, that means you have to be outside to get that vitamin D. Now, these days we tend to supplement foods with vitamin D. Like if you go buy milk, you'll see that it says enriched with vitamin D. But your skin also has the ability to make this for you if you're getting some outdoor time. Your skin's wonderful for sensations. So your skin has what are called Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles, and these are touch receptors. Meissner's corpuscles give me delicate touch sensations, whereas Pacinian corpuscles give me like a deeper touch sensation. Like if I pick up something heavy, it helps me identify the weight of that thing that I'm holding. The rub to this is that your skin's really good at picking up minor variances in the world around us. So I can stand there and feel which way the wind is blowing because my skin identifies that directionality, if you will. So very important for sensation. Excretion. Your skin has the ability to release certain chemical products. You release a lot of sweat, and with that sweat travels a variety of things like salts and some uric components, a whole host of things. Not to mention all the glands that you have, so sweat glands, oil glands. You have what are called ceruminous glands in your ear that produce earwax, a whole host of glands. Body temperature regulation. Your skin is the radiator for your body. When you are hot, you send blood into the skin to radiate off heat. When you are cold, you will hold blood away from the skin so that you can keep your core body temperature elevated. So your skin is a wonderful temperature regulation mechanism. And last but not least, you can't leave out nonverbal communication. How many times have you run into someone you know and known exactly how they feel just by looking at them? Your outer surface most certainly allows you to communicate the way you feel without any need for words or posturing or what have you. let's continue. All right, there are three main regions of the skin that I want you to be familiar with. There is an epidermis, making up a very small margin at the very top of the skin, a dermis, which is much thicker, and then a hypodermis below this. The epidermis is like the shield, all right? This is going to be a dead layer at the very top for the most part. This is the epithelium, the epidermis, the covering. The outermost portion of this is dead cells, and these dead cells are really tough. They can take a lot of abrasion, and they don't have any nutritional value really, so nothing eats on them. Makes your skin a wonderful barrier. It's like the desert out there, man. Your epithelium, your epidermis out on the outer surface here, epidermis, top layer of the skin, very tough. It's the shield that protects you. And again, as an epithelium, it is avascular. That's why at some stage you've skinned your arm or knee or whatever and seen little pieces of skin peel off but no blood. All right? That's because the epithelium is avascular. It gets its nutrition from below. It gets its nutrition from the dermis. The dermis is where like all the action happens, team. The dermis is where you find the glands of the skin. The dermis is where you find hair follicles. The dermis is where you find the big touch receptors. The dermis is connective tissue. And it's very strong. Okay, very strong indeed. The dermis of your skin is very, very tough. And again, when I grab my skin and pull, I don't tear chunks off because the dermis is that dadgum tough. The dermis is like that leather jacket. In fact, if you've ever seen suede leather, that's just the dermis of a cow. And it's very tough, very strong. All right, last but not least, a portion here at the base of this is the hypodermis. So we have epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. The hypodermis is underlying fat tissue. It's a fatty cushion. It sort of helps connect the skin to underlying musculature. It's an underlying cushioning layer. So if you take your skin and you kind of push against it, you can feel this little bit of cushion no matter where you are in the body. That little bit of cushion is adipose. It's fat tissue. And that's what makes up the hypodermis. Yeah. So we've got the epidermis, which is incredibly tough. It is epithelium. The top layer is dead cells. We have the dermis, where all this action happens, where all the glands are found. And the dermis is incredibly strong. It's made up of a fibrous connective tissue. It's almost all collagen in there. Super strong. And then the hypodermis, which is basically an underlying fatty cushion that sort of lets the skin wiggle around a little bit without causing any major damage. Yeah. Let's go here. Let's talk a little more about the epidermis. So I will point out a few things about this. The first thing I will say is you have incredibly thick skin on your palms, on your soles, and then pretty thin skin by comparison, like again on the bottoms of your arms and your chest and legs and what have you. You also find some interesting things in the skin. Amongst those are melanin granules. Melanin is what gives rise to the skin's pigmentation, the color that we have on our skin. That is all driven by melanin. Where I've got it, melanin right here. So melanin is made at the lowest possible layer of the epidermis. So that would be this part right here. We're looking right there. That is this right here. So this is the dermis. That is right here. You can see these little lumps in it. Those little lumps can be seen right there. So that's the dermis. This is the epidermis. The melanin that gives rise to the skin's coloration is found right through here. You can see this brown. These are melanocytes that are making melanin. You can see the melanin on top of these cells in there, giving rise to the skin's coloration. Why do we have melanin? It's to protect us from ultraviolet radiation for reasons we're just about to talk about. Also in the skin, we find a few other interesting things. There are what are called carotenohyalin granules. They just make keratin. Keratin is what gives the skin its toughness. And of course, what are called lamellated granules. We will simply refer to these as waterproofing agents. They're glycols. They're lipids, basically. Your skin is pretty dadgummed waterproof, and it's pretty darned waterproof in no small part because of these granules here that provide waterproofing agents. All right, yeah, that'll do. That'll work just fine. Melanin, very important for us. In Then we have the dermis. The dermis of the skin is found here, and yet again I will say that this is incredibly tough. The dermis of the skin is very, very strong indeed, and the dermis of the skin is primarily composed of collagen fiber. So let's talk about the dermis. The dermis of the skin, yet again, is comprised of this like dense, irregular connective tissue is what it's called. It's basically just a whole bunch of collagen fiber that gives the dermis of the skin its general toughness. And in the dermis of the skin, you find all this really fascinating stuff. You have the hair follicles here with their erector pili muscles. You may realize when you get a chill, your hair might stand up a little bit. That's your erector pili muscles contracting. You have what are called eccrine glands and sebaceous glands. Where's the sebaceous gland? Here's one right here. Eccrine glands, as seen here, these are your sweat glands. We're about to talk more about those. And then sebaceous glands, as seen here, sebaceous glands are oil glands. They produce oils for your skin surface, yet another waterproofing agent. The dermis of your skin gives that toughness. It provides the nutrient supply that keeps the epithelium on top working. The dermis of the skin has your touch receptors, the big ones, the main ones at least, that allow me to feel this board and know its texture. So the dermis of the skin, that leather jacket, the tough underlying layer that allows me to pull against the skin and not have damage. Very important for us. Now, I will point out a couple other kind of neat things. Your dermis can do some weird stuff on occasion. And one of the weird things that it can do is give rise to things like fingerprints. So you have what are called dermal ridges. And those dermal ridges can become quite apparent and give rise to your fingerprints, which are actually friction ridges. They give you the ability to hold things by adding friction to your fingertips when necessary. So the dermis, folks. The dermis is pretty darn neat from my perspective. I will also say that your skin is held down in kind of neat ways. You need to know about what are called cleavage lines. So your skin has a great deal of collagen fiber laying itself down in very predictable patterns all across the body, so that your skin's not just like wearing a sack on the outside of your body. It actually is held down in very specific ways all across the body using, again, this collagen fiber. And you probably realize this because in the medical world, when we do surgery, you'll oftentimes see surgical scars entering the body in kind of weird ways. It's because a doctor is going to try to cut in between these cleavage lines, because when you cut between those cleavage lines, the wounds tend to try to self-heal. They will self-close. I mean, you will get stitches, but you oftentimes don't even need them. The wound will self-close. Whereas if you were to cut against the cleavage lines, the skin would constantly be pulling on the area of the wound. It would increase the risk of damage. One more kind of neat aspect of this are flexure lines on your hands. So these are in essence the same concept. You can look at the palm of your hand and see these lines here. That's where the skin is being held down very tightly to underlying musculature. So I can come in here and I can pinch up skin on my arm like this very easily. If I try to pinch it up in the other way, oh, it's a lot tougher. And the reason for this is because the way the skin is held down to the body, in essence, preventing you from getting blisters constantly. And it works. And we're back. So my camera died, unfortunately, so we are on another day. We are here discussing the pigmentation of skin coloration. Now let's get a couple things out of the way. This is keratin and hemoglobin down here. These can also contribute to skin coloration. Keratin, not keratin, but keratin, found in certain plant products. Most people think of carrots as having a lot of keratin, can accrue in the skin surface and give the skin somewhat of an orangish hue, something like what you see here. So this is a person who is a vegetarian, a person who is not. You can see this yellowish tinge to the skin. That is a high amount of keratin in the diet. It's a dietary issue. This is not jaundice, all right? Jaundice is a condition where the liver isn't working particularly well, and you can have a buildup of pigments in the skin that can also give rise to a yellowish pigmentation. This is not jaundice. This is simply a dietary intake of high keratin. Hemoglobin also can play a role in skin coloration. I can put my hand up in the air and kind of pump the blood out of it, and then if I show you both hands simultaneously, they look a little different. The amount of blood in the skin surface can certainly augment the color patterning that is seen there. Far more important than these, however, is melanin. Melanin gives rise to the true skin coloration in all animals out there, okay? Your skin's pigmentation is melanin. Your hair pigmentation is melanin. Your eye pigmentation is melanin. And it's the same for the other critters that are out there, all right? This one runs the show. And we have a reason for producing melanin, and that is that it protects us from ultraviolet radiation. It protects us from sunlight. And you know this. If you were to start playing guitar all the time, the ends of your fingers would toughen in response to the stresses you place upon them. If you start lifting weights all the time, your muscles will enlarge and become stronger in response to the stresses that you place upon them. And if you start spending more time outside, your skin will develop more melanin, tan, if you will. You will gain more melanization because your body will be responding to that excess ultraviolet radiation that you're coming into contact with. Melanin protects us from UV radiation, but the question becomes, why? Why does melanin protect us from UV radiation? What is the problem with UV radiation? You see, there's a reason that when we look at the globe, we see variations in melanin production in humans. When you look around the equator, people tend to have more melanization. And then as you radiate from the equator, there tends to be less melanization. This is pretty obvious because when sunlight impacts the equator, it's coming in on a right angle, so there's more UV radiation that makes it through the atmosphere at this particular location. Whereas if you were to go up towards the poles in any direction, the incidence of light as it impacts the atmosphere is at such an angle that a lot of light simply reflects off into space. So, because light comes in at a direct angle at the equator, there's more UV radiation coming in, there is more melanization that occurs in these regions. And again, the further up or down you go, the less melanization that occurs. The question becomes, why? Why do we produce melanin in order to protect us from ultraviolet radiation? Now, most of the time you ask this question, people will answer cancer, skin cancer. You know, your chance of getting skin cancer is very low if you get a lot of melanization. This is just reality. But that is not going to be in play here, because skin cancer typically is only a problem when you're much later in age. You're not going to die from skin cancer from sun exposure when you're 14 or 15. It's very, very, very unlikely. So this is a much later in life situation. You see, selection, natural selection, the pressure from this drives us to increase our chance of having fertile offspring. So is there something about UV radiation that can augment your capacity to reproduce? The answer is yes. All right, here we go. UV radiation has some good and bad effects that are worthy of our consideration. It's bad because UV radiation destroys folic acid. Folic acid is incredibly important for having fertile offspring. You don't get good cell division without high levels of folic acid. Like if you are taking prenatal vitamins, in other words, getting ready to have an offspring, a child, that prenatal vitamin is going to be packed with folic acid because it reduces the rates of pretty much all of the major birth defects by a massive margin, like 80% decrease. Huge change. I guess this is where I get on my soapbox and I say, if you're thinking about being pregnant, if you're contemplating having a child, make sure you're taking prenatal vitamins because you can reduce the risk of major birth defects by a massive margin by taking prenatal vitamins. So, folic acid, really important for having fertile offspring. By comparison, we need UV radiation in order to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is absolutely required for us to be able to absorb calcium from our diet. So you have to get enough UV radiation in to make vitamin D, but block enough UV radiation that you don't destroy all your folic acid. It's a balancing act. The equator gets lots of UV radiation, so they're going to have plenty of vitamin D, but you're worried about folic acid so you can have healthy babies, okay? So you make a lot of melanin there to protect your folic acid because you're going to have plenty of vitamin D. Going up towards the poles, on either side of the planet, up towards the poles, there's not a lot of UV radiation coming in. So you want to use as much of it as you can to make vitamin D because folic acid breakdown is not going to be a problem. It's a gradient, folks. It's a gradient. in terms of being able to make vitamin D, but protect your folic acid storages. That is why this pattern of skin coloration appears on the globe. To be very frank with you, this is about having healthy offspring. That's all it is. That's very fascinating. Let's go here. Albinism. So albinism is a condition where the body can't make melanin. It's a genetic augmentation, a genetic malformation, a mutation, if you will, where the body cannot make melanin. This is not particularly a problem for us. You can imagine that this squirrel here is not long for this world because a hawk's going to tear it to shreds given the opportunity because it lacks camouflage. But for us, it's not so much of an issue. I will say, however, that people whom are albino tend to suffer with eye issues. If you're not aware, if you can see my eye here, my pupil is incredibly dark. So your pupil on the inside of the eye there, it's not dark physically, it's just a hole that goes into the back of your eye. And the back of your eye is non-reflective because it's heavily invested with melanin. This is a good thing. By having the back of your eye be non-reflective, it makes your vision very sharp. People whom are albino and can't make melanin, they tend to have vision issues because they get a lot of light bouncing around in their eyes, which is not ideal for sharp vision. Yeah, let's go here. Let's talk about our glands. So there are oil glands and there are sweat glands. In the world of oil glands, what we're going to talk about are sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands produce a lipidy substance that kind of acts like a waterproofing agent, and it also contains a few antibacterial substances. Your sebaceous glands become active post-puberty, and these are the classic glands that give rise to pimples. Whiteheads will just be where the duct to the sebaceous gland is blocked, and so the gland makes this sebum, this substance, this lipidy substance, and it will fill the underskin area. And again, let's be honest, you squeeze that thing and stuff comes out of there, and if you feel, it's a greasy sensation. That's sebum. This is the production of a sebaceous gland. Blackheads are just where this occurs, and it sits there long enough that the sebum begins to solidify and oxidize, so it turns darker in color. And then, of course, there are the sweat glands. Now, there are two types of sweat glands. There are eccrine sweat glands and apocrine sweat glands. Eccrine sweat glands are active from the moment you're born. These are the classic sweat glands that help you cool yourself evaporatively, and they work fantastically well. They're located all across the body, top of your head to the bottoms of your feet. They are everywhere. Whereas sebaceous glands are only where you find hair. So sebaceous glands are hair associated, whereas eccrine sweat glands are everywhere. Again, the classic sweat gland. And then there are the weird ones. The weird ones are the apocrine sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands are fascinating, and I want you to know about this. I think this is kind of neat. Apocrine sweat glands are found underneath your arms and between your legs, exclusively. God dang. And then there are apocrine glands. So apocrine glands are pretty strange in the world of skin glands because they are pretty rare. You only have a few thousand of them, whereas you have millions of eccrine glands. A few thousand apocrine glands. They're confined to your armpits and between your legs. They only become active post-puberty. They increase their secretions during sexual activity, and they increase their secretions during the fertile phase of the menstrual cycle. Which means, what the hell is an apocrine gland? And the best we can assume is that apocrine glands, being that they produce true sweat plus some weird fats and proteins, we believe that they are a closet scent gland. Okay? Most mammals have the ability to communicate via scent. This is a real thing. Is it any surprise that humans might also be able to communicate with one another via scent? This is possible. This is absolutely possible. And if that is the case, then apocrine glands are probably the way that this happens. So, there may be times in our lives when we are more enticing to those which are pursuing us, and it could be because of these apocrine sweat glands. Kind of neat. Let's go here. So these are considered appendages of the skin of the integument. These are nails and hair. Now, first thing I want to say, nails and hair are the same thing, all right? If you look at the chemical composition of a hair and the chemical composition of a nail, they are basically the same. And that is to say that a nail is kind of just a big hair, and a hair is just a slender little nail. Okay, so they're very, very similar. Nails are just used as a tool to help us pick things up and sort through materials, and hair is a protective measure. You have hair in places that you really want to keep safe. Like the top of your head from the impact of sunlight would be a good example of this. So we have these for a reason. Being that they are so similar, they grow in basically the same fashion. Hair has this bulb at the base. You might call this a root. And in this will be blood vessels that provide growing cells that grow out, and the cells dry out and die before they reach the skin surface. And a nail is the exact same concept. It'll have this matrix at the back that makes the nail. The nail will be living for a period of time before it eventually dies, and then it will slowly move across the surface until it sloughs off at the opposing side. And you probably realize this, because at some stage you've pulled a hair out by the root and seen it, and it's been very soft on the end, kind of gushy even. That's because those are living, dividing cells. And if you are quite unlucky, you might have yanked a nail out before, or seen someone who has. And the nail, when pulled out, will have a hard outer surface, but then the backside is very soft and floppy, because those are living, dividing cells. It's the same thing, okay? Just a different variant of the same concept. Yeah, good. Let's go here. Let's talk a little bit about burns. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of detail on this, but I will mention a few things. When we burn the skin, we can damage just the most outer surface, or we can get pretty deep in. And this is where we get our terms set here. 1st degree, 2nd degree, and 3rd degree burns of the skin. Now, burns are dangerous because when you burn the skin, you basically prevent the skin from holding fluids into your body. So when you have a big burn over a large portion of the body, you get these blisters, as you can see here, and these blisters will weep out fluid, and you can actually have your blood get entirely too thick, and you can have a stroke from this. So you can die of what's called hypotensive shock as a result of a burn, because you're wicking out fluid so quickly. And you know this because, again, you've fallen and skint your hand or your knee or something and seen it weep out a small amount of fluid. Normally your skin holds that back because of the waterproofing agents in the skin surface. If you damage that outer layer of skin, it will weep out fluid, and this is potentially dangerous. So let's talk about our terms. 1st degree burn, you just burn the epidermis. Minor skin burn from sunburn, I should say, on the skin. This is just damaging the epidermis, so it's not really that big of a deal. Normally this will be replaced in a matter of a week or so. It's not the worst problem ever. 2nd degree burns. This is going to be burning the upper dermis. So if I go back to here, we're burning not only the epidermis, but part of the upper dermis in a 2nd degree burn. Whereas a 3rd degree burn is burning all the way through everything, all the way down to the hypodermis. And you can imagine if you burn all the way to the hypodermis, having to rebuild all of this is pretty complicated. Whereas just damaging the upper surface is pretty easy to mitigate, pretty easy to deal with. Yeah, so 3rd degree burns, full thickness of the skin, and these are far more dangerous. You will weep out far more fluid. And one of the great fears of a burn over a large portion of the body, again, your skin is a wonderful barrier against pathogens, is that you'll get some sort of infection. Most people have problems from burns with infection because all these bacteria in the world around us can set up shop in your tissues and lead to major problems, complications to this that you don't want. So we're getting pretty good at treating these days. In the US, if you have a major burn across a large portion of your body, it's not unlikely that they'll just take it and wrap the whole area in a highly specialized cellulose wrapping that imitates the skin and basically keeps bad stuff out so that the skin can grow in from either side and eventually replace the area underneath these cellulose wraps. It's kind of a neat process. We do all sorts of things these days. We do skin grafts, a whole host. So yeah, these, I should say, are burns on the skin surface. And then last but not least, let's talk a little bit about skin cancer. 3 formats that we're going to discuss here. Normally these come from irritation of the skin of some fashion. Most of the time you hear about sunlight leading to problems with skin cancer. I've heard of people that are constantly exposed to certain chemicals getting skin cancer, I should say. Like I knew a guy that worked at a factory that made wood power poles, and he was constantly getting hit and blistered with these nasty chemicals from the power poles they were making, and he ended up with skin cancer as a side effect of that. So you can get this in a variety of ways, not just sunlight. But these are the three main ones that people tend to talk about. Basal cell carcinomas, really common, making up the vast majority of skin cancers that you will hear of. These are, not that big a deal, if I'm being frank with you. People that grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s and were outdoors a lot, today these same folks are getting these little basal cell carcinomas popping up all over the place. You go to the doctor, they chop it off and send you about your way. All right, it's really not a big deal, pretty easy to treat. We just go in and cut them off and put a Band-Aid on it and call it a day. Good friend of mine, he had a new Band-Aid every 3 or 4 weeks because he grew up in Florida and never wore sunblock in the 70s. So this is his reality now. He's getting these all over the place. The problem is they're kind of unsightly, like you can see it. And if you look at this kind of a raised area with a divot in the middle, that divot in the middle tends to become bloody and not be fun. It can get infected. These are basal cell carcinomas. So we tend to just go in and chop them out and call it a day. Then there are squamous cell carcinomas. These look like scaly patches, all right? Irregularly shaped, larger, scaly patches. And they're sort of famous for being on the ears and the lips and hands, okay? Like I've got a few things on here, but just about every time I've ever heard of a squamous cell carcinoma, it's been a lip issue. These are dangerous. These are capable of metastasizing, that is to say, they can spread to other tissues and lead to cancer forming in other parts of the body. So this needs to be treated pretty quick once you see it, all right? It's an emergency, as it were. You're going to get checked out. And what they'll normally do in this particular case is just hit it with some radiation and chop out as much of it as they can and call it a day. The prognosis here is pretty good if you catch it early. And then there are melanomas. Melanomas, these are cancers of melanocytes, the cells that make melanin. And as a result of this, it gives areas where there is melanoma this incredibly dark color. Not only is it an incredibly dark color, but it tends to be very irregular in its shape. What we normally use to describe a melanoma is what's referred to as an ABCD rule. A for asymmetry, so this thing is non-symmetrical. B for border irregularities. If you look at this, it's got all sorts of border irregularities. C for color. If it looks decidedly different from the rest of your skin's tone, maybe this could be a problem. And then last but not least, D for diameter. If it's bigger than the end of a pencil eraser, 6 millimeters or more, maybe this is something you should have looked at. Because, look, I can't voice this to you seriously enough. Melanomas spread fast. They spread all over the body and lead to cancer forming in other places. They metastasize with great speed, and they are incredibly dangerous. This is one of those sensations where you go to the doctor as soon as is physically possible if you want to survive this thing, right? We normally will chop out a large portion of tissue around it, and then you're going to have further radiation or chemo to help deal with the problems therein. Melanomas are scary and not something to be trifled with. And that, folks, I believe is the end of this lecture. So I hope this turned out well. It's been kind of a weird recording experience, but all the same, have a wonderful day and looking forward to talking with you on Zoom. Thank you.